Hey guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Exciting day because I am filming on a new camera today, and by new camera I really just mean new phone because I just film on my phone. I did not get a new actual camera, but I upgraded my Pixel 2 to a Pixel 6a, so very exciting. I don't know anything about camera specs, so I have no idea if this camera on this phone is supposed to be better than the old one, other than I assume it is because it's a 5-year newer phone. But the thing I'm really excited about is that I don't have to keep my phone plugged in to film videos for fear of it dying after like 3 minutes because my old phone's battery life was trash. So that's exciting for me. Um, moving on to the actual video. So today I'm going to review A Taste of Golden Iron by Alexandra Rowland. So this is coming out on August 30th, and this is a standalone political fantasy romance, adult fantasy romance. So this book takes place in an Ottoman Empire-inspired world, and we follow Cadeau, who is the prince of this realm, this nation, and a couple days after his sister, the Sultan, has given birth, they're out on a hunt and something goes down and he ends up getting into a public scuffle with the body father of the Sultan's new daughter, and some people end up dying, and in order to kind of save face and kind of prove his loyalty to his sister, to the people, and kind of just make up for this whole kind of little scandal misunderstanding that had happened, he ends up getting put in charge of investigating this break-in that had happened while the Sultan was giving birth, as a way to like kind of prove his worth, I guess. He also ends up getting assigned a new bodyguard because of some of his guards died in this misunderstanding, and the one who was like the primary bodyguard was kind of at the helm of the misunderstanding in which those guards had died. So he ends up losing his job as a guard, and so Cadeau gets a new bodyguard assigned to him named Evermer, and so this is their story of their slow burn kind of enemies to lovers relationship as well. So this story is told through 2 points of views. We get Cadeau's and Evermer's, and they pretty much alternate. Every chapter they'll change, or sometimes they'll change within the chapter. And I love this book. I was going to say it now. I love this book so much. And so I'm talking about this in parts. So I'll start with the world. So I don't really know anything about the Ottoman Empire, so I cannot really talk about how accurate some of the things the author was inspired by the Ottoman Empire are. I'm not really sure how much of it was taken from that versus her own mind, although there's some things that are obviously not taken from the Ottoman Empire, but some of it could be or could not. I don't really know. I don't know how accurate any of the terms or anything like that, so can't say anything about that, but I did like the world a lot. One thing I liked about the nation they're in specifically is that the nation they're in kind of built their reputation around economics as opposed to fighting wars and having armies and stuff, which I feel like is pretty common. I see in fantasy books, like whatever nation you're in, they have lots of fantasy books I've read are around nations that have warriors and fight wars, and that's important and stuff like that. But I liked how this one was very focused on the economics. They've kind of built their reputation on the purity and consistency of their metal coins, and it's like, oh, if you get coins or payment from them, you know it's true. Like, you don't have to worry about being counterfeit or anything like that. You just know they'll always be consistent, like the consistent weight of gold or whatever. And part of that, I think, is because one of the magic elements in this is the ability to touch, taste metal. I think the book implied it was about 10% of people are born with or have this ability where if they touch metal, they can like sense how pure it is, like how much, what percentage of gold or silver or whatever it is versus whatever else they make up in it, because I don't think any of the coins are supposed to be 100%. It's like 95% with a little bit of other stuff in there for like structural reasons. And I thought that magic also was pretty interesting. I do wish we had seen it more throughout the book. Like, the ways it was brought up and used were definitely interesting. I just wish we'd seen it more because it was cool. But yeah, I enjoyed this economics-based world. I know this is not the only fantasy book I've heard does this, but I have not read others. I've just heard of others, so I'm definitely, having read this one, more interested in picking up those others, kind of economics-based fantasy books, knowing that I like this kind of economics-based world in it. Also, the world this is set in is very queer normative. The nation we're in has normalized non-binary people. That's a normalized thing in this world with their own pronouns, and like they throw it in and they just keep moving on. Like, there's like no explanation needed because that's just the way it is in this world. They've also fairly normalized queer relationships as well. The other thing I thought was interesting about and this is specific to the country this book was set in as opposed to the entire world, was the way family relationships work in this world is very interesting. It's like, so the father of the prince is called the body father because he's truly only there to give the other half of the genes. Like, he's father in only that way, and he has no, because he did not marry the sultan, because this was an agreement of just him fathering the child, he has no rights to be her father. Like, he's not really considered her father in the way we would consider like a paternal figure. Like, Cadeau is considered sort of the paternal figure of the new princess because he's her uncle. And so in this world, unless you get married first, the father doesn't have any rights to the kids. And so, like, they do get married and thus would have rights, but it's also really common to not do that and just do this whole body father thing. And it was quite interesting, especially since the body father was from a different country where their familial relationships work the way we do, with like, you have a kid and you're their father kind of thing. And so, like, reading about the clashes where he didn't really understand his position in this society, and then being like, what do you mean you don't understand? Like, you're just the body father. It was a really interesting kind of like underlying thread that I enjoyed kind of exploring the ways this familiar relationship would work. So this is definitely a pretty low fantasy world. I mentioned the touch tasting as one type of magic. There's also, we briefly see some kind of truth detection magic where there's some people who are, I presume, born with the ability to detect lies versus truths. And so you don't see either of those a ton, so it felt very low fantasy, even though there is magic present. It would have been cool, again, to see a little bit more of that truth detecting lie, or at least maybe a little bit more explanation. Like, I assumed they were born with it, but they didn't really talk about that. So I do think maybe she could have gone into a little bit more detail about, but I still enjoyed it. I don't think it was necessarily like a big ruiner of it, because she did not just. So on the plot side of this book, the main non-romantic driving plot in this book is the mystery of this break-in that Cadeau is investigating, kind of who did and why. And there's also the secondary conspiracy of these counterfeit coins that have appeared, which counterfeits in this country are like super rare and like not a thing like ever because of the touch tasting. So we kind of have that also. And I enjoyed this mystery plot. It wasn't necessarily like the most twisty mystery plot line. I mean, this isn't a mystery book, so I don't necessarily expected it to be like blowing my socks off mystery. But I enjoyed it. I enjoy having mystery plots, trying to figure it out. I definitely had pretty strong suspicions somewhat early on about at least partially who was involved in some of these mystery lines. And so definitely somewhat predictable, but I still found it pretty enjoyable. So I will say there was a scene later in this book with some of the antagonists of the mystery plot and the break-in plot, kind of in a confrontation with our two heroes, as it were, that the antagonists came off a little cartoony in their villainy, and so, like, not my favorite scene, a little sillier than I think the rest of the tone of the book was, but other than that, I still enjoyed it overall. But despite these, like, couple minor quibbles I had, the romance in this book was so good that it just totally made up for it as far as my overall enjoyment of this book. It was so good. So this is a very slow burn romance, first of all, which I love. I really love slow burn romances. So this was definitely a slow burn. And so the way it's also enemies to lovers, because Evermer, the new bodyguard, he knew the two bodyguards that got killed at the beginning of the book in the public scuffle. And so he ends up starting out with a pretty negative opinion of Cadeau, because he's like, Cadeau got these guards killed for nothing. They were my friends. They didn't deserve to die. It's so frivolous. Their deaths were frivolous and meaningless, and I'm bitter about it. And I think that's totally fair on Evermer's part. As an initial kind of impression, I don't even blame him for this. And so he starts off pretty. He dislikes Cadeau at the beginning pretty strongly, and Cadeau's also not in a good spot initially because of all this. He's kind of lost. He doesn't really know what he's doing with his life. He's also he's distraught over this miscommunication that happened and that caused the deaths of these frivolous deaths of the guards. He's personally distraught because he does care. Like, he cares that they died, and he feels awful about it. And so they definitely don't start off on the best foot. But one thing I think Alexandra Rowland did really, really well is, before you even get to the romance part, she built these characters' relationship into such a strong friendship first. Like, it really turned from enemies to friends to lovers, not just enemies to lovers, and I loved that. I love the way she built the relationship. You could really see through each of their point of views and through their actions and kind of their more passive thoughts, how their opinions of each other were changing as they spent, because they spend a lot of time each together, right? Like he's the bodyguard, lots of forced proximity here. So you see their opinions of each other changing as they learn things about each other. They like unlock pieces of each other's personalities. They start realizing maybe some of their assumptions were unfair initially. Their initial opinions were maybe unfair of the other person, and I just love the way that unfolded. It unfolded into a really, really strong friendship between the two before it progressed to falling for each other more than friends. And so also in addition to just the way it unfolded, the way it was done too was so respectful. I think with bodyguard romances, especially when it's a bodyguard with a prince, the possibility of that power dynamic turning bad is really easy, because bodyguard in any case is going to have some kind of power dynamic, because theoretically the person being guarded is somewhat the boss of the bodyguard, so boss employee dynamic. And then throwing in that the boss is also just the prince like of the realm is like a whole nother wrinkle in that. And so I definitely think this power dynamic was handled very well. The main characters had discussions about, like, they were both very self-aware of the positions they were in relation to each other, in that dynamic on both sides, in relation to how some of their actions could affect each other's reputation, each other's career, in the case of Evermer and his career in the guard. And they talked about it, and they really came to terms with it, and they really made sure to set their boundaries, to be very clear that they had that, like, Evermer had free will of choice in a lot of situations. He's like, no, just because I am the prince, I am not ordering you to do these things. Like, you have the choice to do these. It was very well done. And these discussions really came off in a way that weren't clinical. It came off very in character, that they were discussing it. Like, it very much fit for their characters and their own personal anxieties and worries that we see in their heads, that they would discuss this and kind of come to terms with it. And it was just so well done. Like, it was beautiful. Like, the respect in the relationship for each other was like beautiful. It was romantic in the end. Like, the way it was handled just became so romantic. It was so good. And then once they actually transitioned from friends to lovers too, like, they're both so worried about hurting the other or getting hurt themselves, or, like, reputation, all that kind of thing. The same thing mentioned earlier, that it's just like the way they kind of turn into being lovers was done so well, and it was so respectful, and they're just both just so scared of hurting each other that they don't even want to, like, say anything. And so the tension was so good, because you're just there like, you both love each other, but they don't want to, like, be the first one to say it, because they don't, in case the other person doesn't feel that way. Oh my god, it was just so good. It was so good. The tension, I loved them so much. We also have a foil of a character, this kind of third character that's up with them a lot. He's not a bodyguard. He's Cadeau's armsman. There's a lot of some plot background on that, but he's kind of there a lot as like a friend, and he's kind of the fun, flamboyant character that works as a foil, especially to Evermer's kind of stoic personality, that I think was really, I did not like at first as a character, because I found him kind of annoying at first in his kind of frivolous way he approaches, or had approached, being a guard and stuff. But he really turned around for me into being a character I really enjoyed, and I really liked the way he ended up being kind of a needed catalyst at sometimes between the thoughts of each other. So yeah, A+ romance all around. And then I want to also specifically highlight Cadeau's character, because I think both Cadeau and Evermer were really well done character-wise, but I want to highlight Cadeau's character because of the way the author handled his anxiety. So Cadeau has anxiety attacks sometimes, but he has attacks that we as modern readers, I think, are easily recognized as anxiety attacks, but he thinks they're just him being cowardly. So it's a part of himself that he's very ashamed of. He doesn't want people to know he has these attacks. Only very few people know about him when he has them. He usually just locks himself in his room. But the way she talked about it was so interesting. One, I found it very intriguing the way Cadeau interpreted these reactions, because we live in a world where anxiety is a diagnosed condition, but in their world, it's not. Like, they don't know what that is. They don't know. And so I thought him kind of self-diagnosing himself as a coward was a really interesting take on it. I don't think it was a disrespectful take either. Like, it definitely was not calling people with anxiety cowards. That's not the way it was written. It was very much, he thought he was cowardly because of the way he he felt when he had these attacks, how he couldn't face the world kind of thing, made him feel as if he was being cowardly. I really liked the way once Evermore found out about these attacks, the way he was just so supportive of him too, and trying to point out to Kudo, like, look at this thing you just did when you went and saved my life. Like, that's not cowardly. Like, you're a really strong person, and you having these attacks doesn't make you any less of a strong person. But yeah, so anyways, so yeah, I just thought they were really accurate as far as describing how they feel. And the take on him I thought was just really interesting, and it was definitely an interesting representation in this book that I wasn't actually expecting to see. So overall, obviously, I love this book. I would definitely recommend it. And yeah, and I cannot wait for it to come out. I think I might buy a copy when the day it comes out, which is a lot because it's coming out in hardback, and I avoid buying new hardback prices most times. But I really just want to own a copy of this because I love it so much. So yeah, I will see you in my next video.